Yo, we're on.
Yeah, recording. Okay, so hello to everybody out there in COVID UK. Apologies for the 3 weeks lateness of this lunchtime conversation. For a while it wasn't going to happen at all, but we've hit upon this method of doing it instead. It seems to be quite the way of doing things these days, and as we don't know how long it's going to last for, it could be a way of getting used to doing things right now. So for some of you who aren't aware of what it is we do here, Basement Arts Project, we've been running for nearly 10 years now. This is actually the run up to our 10th year in existence. So it's ironic that we're having to pull every single exhibition at the moment, but you know, everything's still going to be on the cards. I've spoken to all the artists that we've got down for this year.
Yeah.
And we're just going to move things back accordingly. We're still going to do them. Everybody still wants to do their projects.
I'm going to move over.
So over the years, we've done on average.
Move over to these now again.
A minimum of 4 exhibitions
again, sort of like the curatorial process that you mentioned before.
We did 10 one
you know,
year.
And how you,
so we've had quite a sort of,
how you see
program on the go for nearly a decade now.
The process of installing.
Lou's exhibition is the last
venues
one that we've had here
as being part of the sort of the decision-making process around how people will receive the piece.
Indoors.
I mean, again, this is one of those pieces that I feel that just like
bloody,
the angles on the wall and stuff, and again the colour,
we're carrying on
the
here.
smudginess of this
we do
over
have an
here,
online
and
journal.
then
It's on
how it, how it works out in the piece as well. It feels like they all go together really well.
The second one,
that piece just
I can't remember off the top of my head now.
It was
I'm
just
losing track of the days trying to keep up with doing this. But, Claire's done a
this was
couple
one
of
of the
posts.
pieces as well.
And the idea is that we'll just keep things going offline
until
until such point as we can venture out into the real world again.
I will
The
see something
journals are on
coming through
our
in
what's
developer,
effectively
and
the
I'll
blog
move it
part of our
upside
site,
down into
studio
stop.
journal.
So it almost
And anyone who sends me any
stops me
material
from getting
whatsoever,
overexcited and
whether
losing
it's
the image if it doesn't
films,
work.
written
But it can also do
pieces,
something different.
music,
I'll talk about it in a different piece. But with
audio
this, it was almost
artworks,
like there was
poetry, if you want,
tornado
absolutely
or
anything.
that kind of
The format of it is up to
drop
the
from the
artist.
sky, and it was
You captured a bit of a biog
one of
about
those fist
yourself
bump
and
moments.
have a post out there. The idea is just to keep people
I can see Dorothy being whisked off to Kansas
in the
over
loop,
here
as
in
it
this
were,
bit.
so that it goes out on social media channels and to our
So when-
It was a bit of a
Bruce, Lou's
A bit
got
of a-
something on there as well.
Lou's got
joyous
something on there as well.
moment.
Yeah,
And I was going
it's a
to say
great.
that it's actually been
it's a
really
great
nice
image.
to just, because I've just done it at the end of a week.
I would
just
say
sit and
it's
think about
almost
what I've done that week
watercolory,
and then
going back to
summarise
that
it.
sort of painting.
It's been useful for me as well.
Going back to that sort of painting idea again. There's just
cheers.
something about it, in
So,
these
yeah,
sort of
anyone
like these
at all
sort of
sort of feel free
splashes
to,
here. That's
submit.
so someone's doing not watercolour, so ink. When you're painting in ink.
Network
Makes me
And
think of that.
that's how as kids as well, we got taught how to do landscapes and to do trees. Want it to blow over straw.
So, he still hasn't managed to join yet.
So when you, because our association to do this project came from Yol, who exhibited here
maybe
last year and did
before I move
performances
this
and stuff.
laptop, because I will.
And
then
I remember
turn the
Yol
laptop
sort of
round
like
so that you all
saying
can see
to
the
me,
works
says,
on the walls.
I know an
So
artist
you won't be able
over
to
in
see
Hull
me, but
who
you'll be able to
would
see
probably really,
what Lou's talking about.
dig working in a place
But if
like
you want
this.
to maybe say something
And
about
so
yourself,
that's how we
just while
sort of
I
like
text you, then I'll
exchanged
be able to
sort of
move
emails and stuff then.
Yes, fine.
When
so
you
this
saw
show is,
the sort
I'm
of
Lou from
basement
Hazelwood. This show
in the
is called
photographs
Landscapes
that
of the Unknown.
online,
Fairly
or
recent
I
piece
can't
of
remember
work,
whether I
I'd say,
sent them
sort
to
of
you.
the last 18 months or so, funded
Did you
by
automatically
Howard
have a
Foundation
sort of like this
for analogue
idea of
photography
what you were
and
going to do
Hull
in
City
here?
Arts as well.
Did all of these
Prior to
photographs
that,
exist,
I've got quite a diverse
or
practice, but
was this something
mainly
that came
rooted in
slowly over
photography
time?
at school.
The project was
Foundation in Leeds,
underway, and I was
undergrad degree in Hull, master's
looking
in
for
Sheffield.
venues, and I'm always
So
interested
going
in
back to photography and back
different
into a
venues
darkroom,
as
which I
well,
also
and the
work as a
challenge of a
darkroom tech
venue.
at York St John Uni.
I
Has been great
purposefully,
because I've
to be
always
honest,
loved to push
didn't look at
photography and the
images
boundaries on
until
it
very,
into
very near the time that I was
abstract
coming
it,
over. I had
chemical
the floor plans from you. I chatted to Yoel about kind of how much space he
making
thought the
images
walls would, how
without
many
camera,
images I
using
had,
old
and if there was any walls I should avoid.
and developers, so a lot of research into that
and
as
that
well.
was literally it.
Was also,
he showed,
so that's kind
he showed
of
me a film that he did, like a little walk around 1 minute film, and I went, all right, yeah, okay, cool. And then came over.
The other landscapes or the urban that are both
my approach to my
known
work
and
is
unknown
probably similar to my approach to curating as well. So,
just
yeah,
came from an absolute fascination
we'll do
with them. Growing up, passing one regularly.
I think there's a certain amount of sort of like, whilst there's improv going on in there, there's a certain amount that you kind of seem to sort of understand about your work that makes you sort of in a position to make that kind of judgment and go, yeah, that'll suit that.
And then they're feeding the domestic.
Yeah, I'm quite confident. Don't see the kind of the judge side as
a landscape.
I don't care about my work. I do. I'm really quite particular, but I have the confidence that I understand, that I know
within it
how it will fit and how it will work, and how I can adapt to be in an environment and work and adapt.
The main images that
so I think if you're really rigid in your work,
you
are
on the blog post is the
image
of the gas
lost and a bit
on Clough Road, which is a really pictorial sort of grayed out image. So Bruce, do you want to get us to that image?
So how do you feel about sort of like people obviously walk into an exhibition like this, and there will be people who straight away don't get it. There'll also be those who will see their own sort of, they'll have their own interpretation, their own reading of it straight away. How do you feel about the fact that, you know, all of these things are possible when people look at your work? You know, how does other people's interpretations sit with you, because you have your own very sort of specific narrative almost behind these things, but it's not apparent straight away. That kind of like comes out the more time you spend with the work.
Hello.
You know, the more you hear about it, the more you read about it or whatever.
Hello.
I'm happy for people to be able to take what they
about the contamination. Did you find that there was quite a lot in the soil around?
I think the work's really quite quiet, quite subtle, and I think it needs a bit of time. I remember reading somewhere a long time ago that you get
the British Gas
about 10 seconds with a piece of work.
Launched in the 90s,
maybe.
I think.
7 seconds is the time, yeah.
Identify the contamination.
Well, that should be pretty lucky for me, because I've got lots of sevens in my date of birth.
So we're all kind of...
It'll be all right.
It's just that part of the process, some of the chemicals that were involved were quite toxic. But they're more or less
I
all
can't control what people are going to think about.
I've retired, so I've lost total track of it all. But I also find them very interesting.
If they do, they will...
the shapes of the
we'll
gas
see a
holders,
lot
especially the old
in something
Victorian
that can be
cast
quite small.
The frames, and some of them have been left preserved here and there, haven't they? There's one on the North Circular in London that you go past if you go eastwards off the A1.
I'm just going to go back over here to this piece, which has the...
and I think that the majority of the protected ones...
Again, one of the pieces that is...
There's two that I shot in Keighley, and I think that, as far as I know, they're protected as well.
I worked on that site as well.
Again, which really you feel just couldn't be sort of cited anywhere else.
The chemical sort of stuff that was going on, was it
that moment of
alkali? What was it?
The piece itself is one from destroyed colour film in the processing, and it's got this tiny little dot in.
It's fine.
Yeah,
which matches with the gold
circle.
They're interplays with the gold circle.
Chemicals called polyaromatic hydrocarbons that are quite like.
Again, it feels like your work down here is part of a sort of a bit of a living history of what's going on, because all along the walls are sort of these the remnants of other people's time spent down here.
And is that why?
And normally those things like the gold circle, which came from Alistair's show, which is now 2014, or even the sort of, again, there's a little sort of like fluorescent paint bit on the wall that again seems to chime perfectly with your piece here. That was from Phil's exhibition, which was the one before you came in here, so the middle of last year. And then there's things like Pippa's glitter is in places, and going back to that sort of piece that's in several different colours here. We've got the purple from Josh and Jill, we've got the cream and polka dots that Alistair put, and then Pippa, when she did her show 3 years ago, painted over it in the pink colour, and all of these kind of like match what you've done, including the sort of like the white of Phil Gurry, which was from 2011 when he did sort of like the square pieces down here, directly onto the wall.
To Keith, who's just joined us.
And it feels like whilst the sort of the walls have built up this sort of accretion of other people's remnants, and we've kind of like left them and worked with them, you've kind of like moved in here to these sort of like spaces, and it's almost like
Tess has been better too as well.
It's almost like the work is interacting with these other things, and is becoming a sort of like a live now happening part of this sort of like this whole sort of history that's formed down here. They kind of like the images stand out themselves whilst weirdly simultaneously merging into its surroundings.
So they were the unknown landscapes.
Isn't that what we do as humans?
Gas holders, which were known and unknown at the same time. And we started chatting about
we stand down
pull on Cook Road.
And then
John gave us a little mini history lesson.
We are living and we are moving and we are
Have I missed the pictures, or we've not seen them?
Yeah, I know we've not started.
Just in on the beginning, John.
We do. And I think one of the things about sort of like art as well is that quite often people see it as something that is like historical from the moment it sort of like exits a person.
Didn't you say, Lou, this morning?
In so much as we have
an hour and then you have to rejoin or something.
Everything is always sort of like presented in such a way that it doesn't feel like it's happening right now, even when it's sort of like contemporary.
I think they've
somehow things feel sort of like
we used it for our Seder.
It's a static timeline. Something happens and it's there, and it goes on a timeline, then it's followed by something else. It's almost like, I guess there's another photograph analogy in here when you're doing things. Like in film, it's 25 frames per second. Something seems like it's moving, it's a constantly flowing thing, whereas visual art, outside of the film medium, seems like very much this is individual frames broken down and set alongside one another. Here, your work kind of feels as though it is almost kind of like filling in the sort of like the frames, bringing it back to sort of like the land of the living again, something that's moving, constantly evolving, as opposed to that's it, it's static and it's done with and we move on to the next thing.
First image, but I think if people go into the space, it's actually the last image that you see,
got three images
they're the gas holders
around sort of all the
and they were kind of a lot of the images are quite abstracted in different ways and different sort of forms. But these two were specifically left as a sort of traditional image, almost like a bit of a
these ones, yeah.
Them in some way. Just
and they were
home
specifically like that, so as you're walking through
around them.
And down.
They're also part
going down
of
the hill.
We'll get to later
the first one that you're looking at is the one when I was talking about working chemicals as well. I mean, it's kind of hard to see with the reflection. You've got it where it's actually they've got almost like these long tendrils coming out in the middle, which is where the stop has actually stopped the development and pulled it.
Are they from film negatives or digital negatives?
And that was again something that was done in stop quite vigorously before going on to fix. You could actually pull the chemical over a little bit.
Right, shall I move across?
Right.
It almost looks like this explosion coming out of the landscape.
Yes, the majority are 35mm. Some of them are medium formats of 6:9.
Again, black and white paper that you can get colour from.
On a
shot on a what, sorry?
It's incredible, that, isn't it?
Universal.
Yeah.
And that was part lumen printed before being worked on in the darkroom. Yeah. So lumen printing is where you take black and white photographic paper out into daylight, and so it's exposed by UV light, so you actually can get colour on black and white paper.
Flimsy cameras.
Oh wow!
And different vintage papers react differently, so that's kind of got a warm sort of.
Yeah. The colours are quite subtle on that one.
Some of them go quite pink and quite blue.
The gas holders are one's blue and one's a grey colour, and then you've got it against a sort of fence that's being put up, and it's across sort of this views from wasteland at the back.
And a traditional little landscape.
Yeah.
Sorry, I know you're probably going to get to this, but just as some background.
And again, I love the fact that you can kind of see the grain in it as well.
And you get that sense of sort of walking into the distance, don't you? You get the hills and the sense of perspective.
And it's a very brief introduction you could give to the project, so that I can contextualise it when I'm looking at the images.
Again, it's hard to sort of see where the terrain ends and the sky begins over on the right hand side. It's really sort of like quite spectral, the landscape.
Into the project, or
yeah, just a brief background, when it was taken, roughly where, and what is it about, just as an introduction.
So moving over to the sort of
image,
I'm going to move over to sort of like the final piece here.
Okay. So the whole project, like I said earlier, was started about 18 months ago.
Whilst it's on the quiet moment of it.
I'm darkroom technician at York St John University.
The birds are unbelievably loud sometimes.
I got a chance to be
which is amazing, isn't it? You think it'd be the industrial sound,
came first within that respect.
Yeah.
By playing through vintage papers, different paper stocks.
Do you want to tell us something
films.
about
I've done a project previously
piece
called To Stay.
Yeah, there's a couple. So the one that you mentioned, first,
interrupting the film processing by putting.
I'll move away from it slightly so you can talk.
Different dyes and
that's
then
the
scanning them
gas holders in Keighley, and that's a different perspective. So it's up at the top of the hill.
Like I said, I've always been quite fascinated with gas holders, and I've got. I tend to buy a lot of really old film,
and
I like the happenstance kind of material, really, and I do research
you hear the natural sounds around, and
so the gas holder of Hull, that image that's been used on the blog and everything was shot on really old Tri-X from about mid-1950s, so you can actually see the emulsion pulling apart. It's very fogged, so it's very thin negative, it's very grey. Takes a lot of work to get the image from it, but it gives it a real sense of sort of the industrial era.
There's a piece of poetry in there as well, isn't there?
So the ones that you'll see
that's
later on
in the second one, and that's in the one where you've just got
medium format, but then abstracted
through
processes of kind of using the wrong focal length.
Oh, that's Leeds, that one, is it?
And really playing to get curves within it, so they become almost folding in on themselves.
And it's just kind of how it trembled and how it moved, and the poem was kind of like that reminiscence of humans interacting with or thinking about.
So should we take a little look around from as you would walk into the show?
And what might have been there
inside. Opposite?
Okay, yeah.
You can
so this is
see
the image that I was talking about up at Hull, which is the gas holder on Cliff Road, and this is the one that was shot on really old film.
Yeah.
You can see that the emulsion's starting to pull apart. It's very thin, it's very fogged, but you get that sense.
Yeah, again, it makes the whole thing seem a lot more sort of like fragile. As I was saying about sort of like at the beginning, how it begins with very sort of like
the patterns on in the ceiling. In the sky, is that from the emulsion?
Vivid in the photograph of the first gas holder as you walk in, and then it slowly sort of seems to disappear through things, and then this sort of like final video piece that's in the corner, hidden, tucked away underneath the stairs.
No, it was 120. It was roll film.
It's all sort of like you say, it's upside down. It's reflected in a pool, which makes the whole thing shake and quake. And again, it sort of seems to have very much a sort of feeling
about
it.
That came out.
Trying to sort of like
So it's quite a risky and a risky process, I guess. But I kind of like that.
This structure has been a fragile
thing. How big's that print? Because I've got no sense of scale. Sorry.
And that's about 10A.
Right.
Yeah.
So
do you think there's anything sort of like
there is the one that we just looked at, which is the colour
environmental
one, which is probably
about
1612?
Right. Sort of this exhibition, some of the ways that things are presented.
The main thing,
I feel like the sort of like the loss of the gas holders is something
not industrial, but
we associate them with sort of like past memories and stuff as we gradually become aware that they're disappearing around
and I think that's
us,
kind of what I meant by
certainly not being used anymore.
The pictorial,
and that we have sort of like cleaner technologies, and this is part of it now.
Almost a shield of what you're looking
for. Things are being replaced.
It's almost kind of
the
smog,
away,
the sort of dirt.
We're coming to that point where we will need hopefully fossil fuels in the future.
And they are.
But then there's also this thing of sort of like the nature of
being lost in the
technology that is photography as well.
Remembered in mind.
Most people are able to take photographs these days. We have phones in our hands all the time.
We
can record as much as we want
on later days.
But we don't look.
But we don't look.
Know.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't get over to
and
get
going
them
back
at the minute. So
in time, we never had that kind of like access to that kind of thing. I often think that. I'd be interested to see some of the things from an outside viewpoint of
who knows what's happening.
When I was younger, but I don't have any photographs.
That does look amazing, even
places that I went.
I really like the
I just didn't take photographs.
We're not seeing it.
It was not something I did.
Not doing it justice.
I work a lot with found footage as well, and what I've been
I really like the thickness.
Really quite fascinated
it's almost like looking through
the similarity of what people record and what we display.
Or, whatever.
And it was because it was quite it was a limited group.
Is it a C print? Is it a digital print?
Class approach now.
That one is a digital print, but I have been doing some in darkroom as well.
Display. But I wonder.
So what I've done with a lot of these is
there's a gap
film.
in sort of being
only
able to signify
the majority are darkroom prints, but some
doing as humans when
because I was trying out different sizes and stuff and sort of time limitations.
We're maybe missing out on what we're looking at.
So it's that one and the
Well, William Eggleston, the photographer, kind of like made a comment about how he was not interested in outside of the frame. That he would set the shot up and everything within that shot, within the frame, was carefully constructed.
From the negative,
and that, he didn't care about people's holiday snaps; they were of no interest to him.
Oh no, I
yes, I've got a flatbed of Epsom.
I do too. I mean, he did say other things as well. I think he was quite contrary in that respect. That kind of fly against that. But I thought that was an interesting sort of like idea that that there's sort of like as though beyond the frame.
I was just going to say, I find that when I've been scanning negatives, it tends to improve.
Should it interest us, or should we be sort of like entirely concerned with the construct that has been put in front of us by what the photographer has set up?
I don't. Sometimes you get programs that you can kind of click, like the stills of light or anything like that, which will kind of take certain marks off or increase contrast. And I don't do that. I just do flat
selfies
scans.
Before they were called selfies through mirrors.
With I'm looking forward to doing darkroom prints of it.
And all that kind of stuff, like looking at self-portraiture, but then on mobiles.
Right.
I collect them off
I just said if Bruce said something, I couldn't hear what Bruce said.
Rather being mediated by glass.
Oh, sorry, No, I was just going to say that I can't help but feeling the tree branches.
Is that a future project on the go, do you think?
It's already. It's continuing. It's been shown. It was shown in 2017 as part of an exhibition.
Top right of the image.
Yeah, there's always stuff going on.
They're very subtle.
Lots and lots.
So what do you have coming up after this? Have you? I know it's a hard time to sort of like think about that, but maybe it's a useful thing as well to sort of like look beyond what's going on at the moment and why we're having to do this.
That kind of comes in from the top. That's
I work on kind of several different projects at once. I've been doing a little bit of work with Access Space in Sheffield.
But
So I was
just to
doing
check as well,
some
that's
digital embroidery work, which I'm kind of looking forward to getting back to. Not sure when the show will be. The show will be when the work's complete.
A black and white image.
Yeah.
Yes.
Alongside that, working on other projects, image text-based stuff, and hopefully setting up a range of publications soon.
Yes, and I understand going into the dark room to work with it.
I will publicise when they're ready,
colour,
if that makes
there
sense,
are more
because they will be
challenges
available for
with
people to
going
submit
in
to.
and doing it yourself.
Right, yeah.
Sadly, these days.
Excellent.
Do you have facilities at York St John
and then
for
potentially kind of discussing with Basement in the future for a couple
We've not got it set up yet. We've got a Jobo colour processor.
Well,
So
I remember our conversations from the opening night, and so I look forward to discussing those in more detail at some point in the near future. Hopefully, the near future.
For, students is a lot more of a challenge.
Yeah.
And you've got a diary.
Virtual's great, but I'm looking forward to coming out again.
It would be somebody that would really want to do colour that would be in there.
Yeah.
So a lot of students are doing digital.
Excellent. Well, thank you for that, Lou. It's been really interesting to talk to you, as always. I think that was one of the sort of like the highlights of doing this, was putting up the show with you and discussing all of these things as we went. I feel there's a lot to sort of like to really talk about, both in the sort of the technical aspect, but also in the sort of the conceptual aspect as well, which I feel both have sort of like equal weight in this work.
Yeah, thank you. I've really enjoyed it. It's been a pleasure to show and to virtually show. And I also remember there was a little bit of hilarity in setting the show up as well.
Do you want to move us on to some more images?
Lion sleeps tonight at one point.
So I go left now.
Yeah. I'd forgotten about that. Yeah.
Songs that help installations.
Right.
I'll be trying that one in future installations as well. Excellent. Cheers. Thanks, Lou.
Welcome.
And
so this is an image that I guess came out of the previous sort of show that I did in the previous processes, which was in destroying film, in interrupting the film chemical process. So that's by when film's being processed by adding chemicals in that shouldn't be there. So I think some of them were caustic soda, putting different dyes in, lemon juice, all sorts. And then taking that and sort of again scan parts of the film. If you're getting quite close, it's a bit difficult, but you can see where it's actually pulling the emulsion apart, especially sort of around these areas. Don't know if you can get in other side, Bruce. So up a bit, in a bit, yeah, around there you can see where it's kind of pulling it all apart. And the colours as well were quite magnificent. I like the ability to sort of change the colour and to see the different colours in the emulsion.
Sorry, can you explain that again? I'm taking this rather slowly. Is that a black and white negative, or is that a colour negative?
That was a colour negative.
So it's a colour negative of an image, or just a blank piece of negative?
Some of them had images that were shot, but the images didn't show at all because the chemical was that strong in what it did to the film.
Got it. Thank you.
But colour neg film, I've not tried colour slide film yet, but I scanned some as positive and some as negative, and you get a different colour response there as well.
Thank you.
Lou, did you choose images that you thought weren't going to come out anyway, or were you risking images that you had a good feeling about?
Initially, when I started this process, the images that I was shooting were images that I digitally manipulated previously, and so I shot them again to chemically manipulate them, but the images weren't there. It was just the chemical manipulation. And then from there, it's been, yeah, I kind of knew that the image, if the image did come, it wouldn't be the forefront at the fore of what was being looked at.
So the dark bit, strip of main dark part of the image, is that from the original image, or is that the effect of the chemicals?
Effect of the chemicals. So that's probably the denser part of where the emotion is, and the pinker colours are where it's been stripped away more.
Thank you.
Do you have any control over the kind of shapes that emerge in that whatsoever, in terms of how you're guiding the chemicals, or is it entirely down? Because I know, you'll have to be sort of like, you slosh the chemical around with the paper in it, don't you?
Because this was filmed, there's less chance of being able to. I've found less chance of manipulating 35mm film like this. So that was more a case of editing through scanning to sort of see what you want to show. But there's potential of being able to really alter it quite more specifically with 5:4 film,
right?
And especially 5:4 in a tray as well, where you could almost draw chemical on.
Yeah.
Could I ask, Lou? Are you doing this chemical process when you're developing the prints, or when you're developing the negatives?
For this colour one, it was during negative, and then it's been the rural landscapes in the show are all done with paper and just chemicals and light.
Thanks.
So it's kind of both.
What I like about this is that if I understand correctly, you've already taken images, you've already taken pictures of these subjects. And so here you've gone in specifically to work with, well, like the subject is still there, but that's not what you're aiming to work with. You're aiming to work with negative things. I like that the subject is still there. It seems to play quite a lot with the ideas of memory and construction of a memory, if you like, or what a concept of a place is. And yeah, by working entirely like in the dark, really, because it's chemical and on the negative, that seems to work for me quite effectively. I was thinking about memory and what's in your mind rather than looking at the subject alone. That makes sense.
Yeah. I caught the first bit of it was a little bit difficult to hear, but I caught the end of it. So this, and I think it is. It's almost like a visual interpretation of your internal thought process, because you can't see what's occurring. I think the thing with memory is fascinating. I think it's even going back to photograph albums, because we constantly retell the memory, so we're remaking the memory. And I'm kind of interested in if we're doing that, so that we can gather other people's and steal other people, so that memory is something that can be manipulated and often, well, always retold and therefore remade. And then can you actually remember something? So remember something that's not actually been yours, but via the way that we collect and record, is that something that is then kind of inbuilt, like a collective memory?
Yeah. So, or how we communicate it. So the sort of the collaborative nature of memory.
How do we, or how do I?
Question mark.
Yeah. In this work, I don't know, because it's kind of it's they're made, but they're representations. So they're representations that people can see what that they can make out that they're landscapes and recognize what a landscape is. And that's very obvious in a lot of the ones that are done in the darkroom. But we only know that through recognizing and being in it, so that they become quite generic rather than specific.
Okay.
Do you want to see more of the darkroom ones to have a look at?
Yeah.
Yeah, Bruce?
Might be a good point to mention as well about curating this exhibition, Lou. So I always think that this is a very striking sort of particular point in the exhibition of how things come together in terms of, as much as you can plan things, that they work out. And there's also the sort of the improvisational aspect as well. When we were putting the exhibition up here, it was like there were certain images that we just knew that we wanted to go in certain places. And this is specifically a sort of very collaborative moment between not just Lou, but 1, 2, 3, at least 4 other artists who've exhibited here in the past, at which point all of the sort of the colours and splashes and just the general nature of the wall around it seem to sort of like be completely harmonious.
Yeah, there was quite a bit of serendipity with the colours as well. And there were certain spots where certain works had to sight, really, where they had to be. There's others around in the other room.
With this one we're looking at, is that the pink on the wall works with the pinkish colour in the print? Yeah.
That's why it was sort of chosen to go there. But I hadn't been in the space before we hung the work, so that's kind of what I was meaning by the serendipity. It was like, wow, that will go there.
And to give a bit of context of sort of what's going on around it as well. So like down here, this piece, I call it, this sort of graffiti piece on the wall down here, originally it was cream and very dark blue in colour, sort of blue polka dots on a cream background, that an artist called Alistair Woods did in 2014. And it stayed there for all the years up until the end of 2016, when an artist who came in and said, oh, can I get rid of this piece on the wall? So I contacted Alistair through Twitter, and he said, oh, I've been waiting for someone to say that. Yeah, please go ahead, remove it. And so when I came home from work that evening and she'd been installing her work, she'd basically painted over the same shape as him, but in the colour that she was using in her exhibition. And it was almost like, actually, you haven't really got rid of the work, but you've kind of highlighted it in a different colour that suits your exhibition. I think that was actually a really good thing about it as well. You can still vaguely see the elements of Alistair underneath when you're close up in the space. And then there's Pippa's work on top of it. But then you've also got Jill and Josh and their dead pets, in the sort of the purple colour here. We've got Phil Gurry in his sort of like, where he was painting onto MDF squares in this around it as well. So it's like literally everything around it, it's been built up by 5 or 6 artists all together. And so Lou's work at this point feels like there's almost a living organism within this sort of like accretion of historical pieces from the past, which kind of remain in spirit by the fact that they're still there, still visible, even in a somewhat degraded form. Only Lou's sort of degrading of form is sort of like happened, and it's been paused and, well, not paused, but stopped. Shall I move on?
Yeah, please do.
Okay, where do you want me to go next? What would be the best? Do you want me to come back?
Do you want to go to the moving image stuff, and then we can leave that room?
Yeah, sure, yeah.
Which might be hard to see.
Hang on a moment. I'll kind of walk into it so that you can kind of see the room.
Yeah, it's just burning out on the screen.
Is it? I'll try and get as close as I can.
Yeah, still burning out.
Still?
No, we've got some. So we've got here is the gas holders in Keighley that was shot from way down, right at the bottom, and then I went right up the top of the hill and just did a little film so you can hear the sounds that are around, which I thought was quite fascinating, because you're getting sounds, sort of quite industrial sounds, sound of nature, cars going past, cars at the bottom. And then this film was film of a gas holder in Crossgates in Leeds, so filmed in the puddle just above the train station, but then interjected with this text, which is kind of looking at human sort of interaction, I guess, and kind of the feelings around sort of the gas holder and what's occurring. It's a bit hard to read, but Bruce has got the files as well, which will hopefully be going online.
That reminds me of the Ewan McCall song, Dirty Old Town.
It's a good song.
It's by Girl by the Gasworks Croft. Do you know that line?
Yeah.
But again, kind of talking from Claire's point earlier about the fragility of them, it's that as well, when they're sort of trembling in the reflection, and it's just very subtle movement in the water. It does give a sense that they're crumbling.
I like the fact that the painted line of the car park sort of breaks into it as well.
Yeah, it's very nice.
Makes it sort of even more sort of ghostly. It's like, you know, the reality sort of like creeping in and overlaying itself on top of the sort of like the form which we assume to be a more solid structure even.
Yeah, and it gives it a kind of fictitious depth, because it almost looks like it's fading, and yet, you know, it's not.
Yeah.
Where's the text from, Lou?
I wrote the text. But yeah, it's mine. The text on its own was actually in the Studio Journal post as well about the show. But then felt right to be within the film.
I find the sort of the rain, the puddle one, very sort of like calming actually. There's a real sort of stillness about it. The movement is only very vague in it. And I don't know, I just think it very calm. And with the other piece where you can hear the sounds of the road, it's actually really nice being down here in the daytime. And you can hear, it's almost as if you are sat up on that hill overlooking it, even when you're not looking at the image. You know, it might just be a sunny afternoon or whatever. It's like it's a sound I can hear from my garden, but I'm hearing it in the basement.
And I couldn't see any of the birds when it was being shot. And it was quite windy as well. So, but it interests me how they're kind of moulding into the landscape at this point as well. So you can almost, if your sort of eyes are quite relaxed, forget that they're there or missee them.
Yeah.
On the puddle, on the boo. Oh, she's gone.
Dropped my phone. I'm back.
I was going to ask you, Lou, if on the puddle shots, if a child would have run through the puddle, just you saw the feet, would you have cut that out or left it in?
I don't know.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it would have been a very different film. Yeah, so probably for that piece it wouldn't have been in, but it would have maybe been in something different.
Okay, interesting.
Right, shall I back out of here?
Yeah.
Right, where shall I head to next?
Does somebody want to guide where a piece that you want to see or have a look at?
I think we need to think about you.
What are these two here? Yeah, exactly, the dark ones.
These two were, again, sort of printed in the dark room, but they were from chemical destruction of black and white film, so unknown landscapes. But they look quite otherworldly, rather than like the rural sort of traditional landscapes that we might see in the other room. They're a bit hard to see with the reflections on them. Yeah. Can you slightly turn it, Bruce? Do you think?
What, the angle of the computer?
Yeah. You might see more or less.
Could try temporarily turning these lights off and just putting the main overhead on. See if that alters anything. Might be too dark now. No, it's gone way too dark with that.
And I guess that difficulty, that's something that Bruce and I chatted about the other week, was the reflections on some of the work is maybe if we looked at showing it again, it maybe they wouldn't be behind glass, because they are quite subtle, and when you're looking and seeing yourself in it, it's giving it a different sense than just looking purely at the image. And then we chatted quite a lot about how we are mediated by glass in various ways as well, via looking through screens, looking through mirrors, all of that stuff, sort of capturing images through glass.
I just thought that earlier, that we are now looking through more than one screen. We kind of look through our own screen, and then it goes via Wi-Fi, and then we arrive at Bruce's screen, and then looking at another screen before we even see the picture.
Yeah. So does that become a difficulty?
Yeah, I think with a picture like this, it does, because I basically can't really see it apart from some black squares.
Yeah. and then the reflection, yeah. And they are quite subtle as well. There's a lot of depth within them.
Would maybe help if Bruce's screen had a black paper over it.
Okay, yeah. And can you kind of cover it over with your arm, Bruce, do you think?
I'll take the jumper off.
Hey.
And see if I can.
Or maybe what you have to do is choose the images that are less subtle, actually.
Yeah, that sounds like
from the point of view of us seeing them. I'm paradoxically, because I agree with Suzanne. They just look like black and white squares to me.
Oh, thank you.
Sorry.
It's not you, it's the screens.
Exactly.
A lot better though, Bruce. Thanks. A lot better. Yeah.
You can see some detail.
Right, can you see anything like that? Because I can't see anything.
It's better.
Oh yeah, there's definitely more now.
The picture that is on my right-hand side, the large two, that one is on Lou's Studio Journal post. It's going to be on the video that I'm putting together of it now as well, a still of it, so you will be able to see that closer up on some of the documentation.
Can you lift it up, tilt it a little bit upwards? Yeah. There's another landscape now. I like all the, I think all the mediated elements that appear now, they actually work with your work. From everything you said about your processes and whatever. I think this just adds another layer.
Jump could slide down a bit, Bruce.
I love this.
I know Suzanne. Yeah, that's it. Oh, no.
Now, this is certainly the oddest guided tour I've ever done. There you go.
But it's interesting as well that we've got the portrait format of what is landscape as well. As the strip, and almost like the how you'd view through a zoetrope as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking, when I first saw it, I was thinking of those slots that arrows go through in medieval buildings, you know, the vertical view like that.
And then you've kind of got, so they're the rural landscapes kind of made by destroying film, and then in the dark room, and next to it is images of gas holders again the ones in Hull, which were done through test strips that were moved throughout sort of the thing, so you're getting a ghostly image and then contact printed in reverse.
Can everyone see that? Because I've removed my cover off the screen.
We can still see the reflection of our images on your screen. The jumper was working well, but it was slightly too high. It was covering the camera.
Hang on a second. All right. I'm just going to try and put this book across the screen. Hang on. That might do us better. Hey. There you go. I can cover most of the screen with it. But now I can't see what you're looking at.
What book is it?
It's our 5 years of Basement Arts project book, which we produced 4 years ago now. It documents a year in the life of projects that were down here.
So you did say, but so is this similar to the first image we saw in process of the degenerated images or negatives? Sorry, I didn't understand what you said.
Okay, no, the negative of this one was not degenerated. It was fine. It was the process of printing that's degenerated it. So it was overlaid onto different sort of test strips, and then those. So it was from a colour slide image that produced a negative, so an overlaid negative, and then they were then contact printed, so it became a positive.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay.
And the black lines, are they the frame?
Yeah, so that's actually on the sheet of paper. So it's a full sheet of 10/8 sort of fibre glossy, and they were laid on top, glass on top. Done.
Okay. Yeah.
That's very striking, that image. Thank you. I like the different shapes of the frames you've created inside the one frame. I like that.
And again, that's a one-off print as well in the way that it's done.
Yeah, I hope one day to see them unmediated, as Suzanne says.
I'm sure they'll be there for a while in the basement.
I mean, this is a very bit of a techie question, but Adam and I work with a photographer called Adam, and we looked into putting museum glass on the front of the prints. It makes a huge difference. Is this standard glass, or have you used museum quality glass?
No, just standard glass. So yeah, that's probably where some of the issues are coming.
No, I think it is. I mean, but you can get stuff that's halfway. It's not as expensive as museum glass. That's much better than ordinary glass, and it's not as expensive, and it makes a huge difference.
Brilliant. I'll look into it. Thank you.
Especially with this one, I actually like the frame and the glass.
Okay. Right. Why is that?
Because of the framing within the actual print.
Okay.
Looks like a window through a window through a window.
Yeah.
Nice. So you actually like the sense of reflection?
Not the reflection. I'm just thinking of this framing and what I said earlier about the screens we're going through. No, I'm not for the reflection either.
That's very striking. I like that one.
Again, another bit of a curatorial note on the positioning here. Again, sort of like looking at things that were already on the wall around it and how they corresponded to the sort of like the colours and patterns within the image itself. I'm going to move in really close to it. Look at that, the windows in the background, isn't it?
I see you lost it now.
Well, I've lost it.
Yeah, but that angle's fine.
Is it? Right, okay, I'm going to cover this up then. I'm going to move in and cover it up.
So, Lou, have you been a painter at some point in your life?
No, not really. I did a little bit of painting on foundation and got told not to many years ago.
Well, maybe you're doing it. I mean, this seems to, particularly when you sit with those things on the wall as well, seems to have a kind of that kind of sensibility to me. Mm-hmm. What do you think?
Yeah, I did enjoy it, and I kind of like, and I always like the saying that goes back in sort of photography of drawing with light as well, and sort of painting that way.
And is the blue I can see, is that reflection?
I would imagine so, yeah.
Yes, yeah, it's moving, I can see.
Yeah.
So what was the process again for this one? I think you have explained, but if you just very briefly.
Yeah, it's same as the pink one. So this is in 35mm colour film that's been interrupted in the film processing. So with other chemicals added. And then sort of scanned and selected frames.
Very striking image.
Thank you.
I think this would work like really, really big.
Mm-hmm.
And just on paper, no glass.
Okay. Yeah. I've got in it as well, which is what Bruce was talking about with the curatorial aspect. There's a tiny sort of circular orange dot, and then there's a gold sort of circle up at the top as well, so kind of matching.
So did you bring more images than you used? So because it's very much not a white cube, so that you could choose the ones that did work in the basement and those that didn't, if you see what I mean.
All the images.
Leave some images out is what I mean, because it just didn't work in what is very much not a white cube.
No, all the images that I brought are in the show. The one that didn't work, which is on the outside where it does work, is the one that we saw at the beginning.
Right.
Because it didn't sit into the room with the other images, but it worked well outside.
Thank you.
So there is as well, Bruce, if you want to go into the other corner, into sort of the side of the chimney breast, there's the one that we sighted in the rectangle.
Oh, yeah. Right.
And this was one that was done in darkroom, sort of vintage paper stock. And it's one that was quite a celebratory one, because it almost looks like we've got this tornado coming down. And the process being in doing them is taking them out of developer before the time traditionally to take it out of developer is, and then putting it into stock and being quite vigorous with the stock. These on a different one we'll see where it's kind of pulled the chemical and the emotion, so it almost looks like an explosion. With this one though, it just it must have just dribbled down, but I got really quite excited about that one with the tornado, and you get the subtleties of tone going around as well, but then it changes again when it goes into fix. So it really is quite a process and then quite an edit afterwards. So something that you can see in the darkroom and be really happy about at one point, sort of a minute and a half later has changed and is not something that you'll use. That's how I found the process. So there's a lot. I've got lots and lots of these images, but not many made it into the show. Some are too similar. Some are not as good as other versions.
So, sorry, was this from a negative or was this from a sheet of paper? Sorry.
It's just literally from paper in the darkroom with light and chemicals. So no negative. It's a one-off.
You put your book on, please, Bruce, if it's there.
Yeah.
And so, what created the tornado effect?
This is what I was saying. I'm not quite sure. I don't know if it was developer sort of dribbling down, or when it went into stop and it kind of pulled it and dragged it. Because I am quite vigorous with the stop with this particular process, and it's always image goes in upside down or image side down. Yeah.
I really like that tornado effect.
So
yeah, me too.
So Lou, why do you put the image side down because then you're not able to see what's happening?
Precisely for that reason.
That's why. Okay.
Yeah. In developer, I see it and I see what I like, and then that's fine. I can take it out of developer, but then upside down in stop, because at that point, at that point it can completely make it or destroy it.
I thought you meant you had it upside down in the developer.
No. No. It's often not in the developer for long though, especially with old stocks until you get to know them. But when you buy old paper, you've maybe got 10 sheets in a box, so you don't really get to know the paper too well.
Going back a little bit to what Claire was saying about, were you ever a painter? I think of this one as very much being like pen and ink.
Yeah, I used to love working with pen and ink. Yeah, just not paint too much.
So I didn't understand. Did you say you found a difference if you bought a very old box of paper? There'd be a variation between the different sheets in the box.
Not necessarily, but between the boxes. So if you bought a box and it only had 10 sheets remaining, you've got a very limited chance to get to know the paper.
Got it.
So it's a very quick and very quick process in some respects.
I like that one.
But what's nice about the older papers as well, which is hard to see here, is the textures that they've got, especially sort of 1940s, 50s paper, and they were weighted, so double weight, single weight, a really beautiful paper. Sadly, a lot of them are very fogged.
But do they have matte and gloss finishes as well? Different papers?
Yeah, and different finishes as well, where would be fairly textured or blusters. They wouldn't be quite like the matte and gloss that we know now. So you can see it maybe on one of the images of the gas holders, Bruce, where it's like a circle, like where it's overlaid. That's on that one. That's on a paper. I don't know if you can see the texture of that one. It might be a bit hard to see there. But that's on a really vintage stock, and it's almost stippled.
What stippled on the actual paper itself?
Yeah.
I didn't know that papers came with different textures other than simple matte or gloss.
Yeah, they had, especially on the Kodak one, they had a little sort of guide as well, where it'd be WSG, which would be white smooth gloss, and then there'd be different ones. So you could choose what paper. Pardon?
Remember Pearl?
Yeah. Pearl was nice.
So is that an image of the gas holder, did you say?
That is, yeah, gas holders up in South Shields.
I like that one. I like the abstractness of that.
Thank you. And there's another one as well that's from the same shoot that shows more of the structure sort of going in. I don't know if you can get to that one, Bruce.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that one as well. But that's printed on modern stock, which is a fibre-based mat.
Wow. From the same negative?
No, from the same shoot, but not the
Right.
same negative. And it's overlaid. There's a couple of negs in each one in the carrier, so it's double exposure.
Double exposure, yeah.
Well, yeah, I like that one too a lot, actually.
Thank you.
That's two negatives, hence the complex pattern. Oh,
Yes,
right.
yeah. Sandwiched in a carrier in larger.
Oh, I think that one works really well.
It's nice, this one.
So what sort of size is this?
It's on 10/8 paper, but the image is probably, Bruce, would you say about 3-inch high?
Yeah, about that, yeah.
Oh, it is a very small image, right?
Yeah.
I like the fact as well that all of the images, even though quite small, are sort of framed in quite large frames. It feels like it's, it takes the image right out of its surroundings, because the surroundings down here could be quite sort of like diverting in terms of, interrupting the image itself. And so having the sort of vast expanses of white around them, and then the frame itself, I think helps you to sort of hone in on the actual sort of what is a very sort of small and delicate images.
And small and delicate for something that was large and industrial in its time.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the ethereal nature of it, is that partly, in that case, it's not the old stock though, is it?
No.
Ethereal nature to it.
With that, it was a lot of it was done in larger, so it was using the wrong lens for the format.
Ah, got it.
So to sort of curve it a bit.
Like that one a lot.
So one of the things, sorry, back to Bruce's pen and ink things is they have been wet. That photographs don't always give you the impression that they've been wet once, and the layering and the absorption, the effects that you get, that's not a constant, but something keeps popping up to me in these very difficult to see images. There's this kind of, as I say, that they've been wet once. The bleeding of the different layers, what read as different layers, that is like a seepage between wetnesses, different levels of wetness. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. I've not thought about it like that, because that's what you see during the process, but not necessarily in the end result.
I don't know how much people can see of this, but this one, it does look like a sort of an idyllic sort of like English country landscape. So like grass on an embankment here coming down, and sort of like the different layers of grey tailing off to nothing at the background, as though you're looking across a sort of rolling hillscape or something.
It's a real shame that you can't see, because in this bit that just looks like it's dense black, there's a lot going on as well. And if you sort of zoom back as well, this was another curatorial kind of point that we chatted about, wasn't it? That we hung these like this as kind of a way of walking down through a landscape, down the hill. So if you can go a bit further back and get all three. So you get that sense of movement. And then we want to go back into the middle one. And again, this is one where we've got a bit of colour from black and white paper. If you can put your book in.
I've just realised what I can do. How stupid of me. I can take all of the thing off the screen.
Hey, there we go.
I just hope that when it's recording this, it's recording you all and it's not suddenly become a black screen.
Well, we'll see. But can get in a little bit closer as well.
I'm right up against the wood of the frame now.
Okay. So yeah, you can kind of see it's a really tiny one, this, and that's the beauty of some vintage papers. They were really small. I think this was a Kodak one, but that's part lumen printed and then part in darkroom, which is the lumen printing is another way of getting colour into black and white stock, and lumen printing is just taking black and white paper outside under UV light, so under daylight, and it will react to it, and then back into darkroom, and you can either do it just into fix or back into developer and then fix.
How long can you take it out?
If your shadow comes out the way, Bruce, you can kind of see more of the colour. I don't know if that's possible.
If it can what, sorry?
If your shadow kind of moves slightly, yeah, there we go. And where the slight white sort of ellipses as well, you can actually see that there's a circle behind it, so it almost gives like a part of a moonscape, sunscape.
Mm-hmm.
Can I ask a curatorial question?
Yeah.
Just seeing these pieces around the electricity cables and meters, did you do the same with the gas meter? Because they're gasometers.
I'm not sure where. Is your gas in the same place, Bruce?
The gas meter is there.
So we just had that one image, didn't we, near it?
Yeah. Well, that kind of like explodes from the bottom of the. Yeah.
Yeah, it's still hard to see that one.
Right.
And the last one on the little trip down, so one down at the bottom.
This one I definitely have from you as a scanned image.
Okay.
I'll take that. You see that?
And that's again like a sort of little traditional landscape where you've got the layers and almost the perspective of going back.
You can really see the sort of like the quality of the paper as well on this one. Which is a really cruel thing for me to say to you, actually, isn't it?
It's a really what?
Which is a really cruel thing of me to say to you, actually, isn't it?
Yes. So, Lou, you know, it's kind of obvious, but you're making decisions on which way up, and that's what's, you know, because you've got this landscape interest. You know, the fact that, you know, it's arbitrary which way up something is, but you're arranging them to fit with this. What you're after in a way, which is what you're seeking, which is landscape.
Yeah, and I think it came about that they were landscape initially. I was just experimenting in darkroom, and they looked like landscapes. So it's obviously the way that I'd kind of viewed it at that point. Then made a particular sort of lodge in my head that that's how I would look for. That's what I would look for.
Yeah. I think it's really interesting that John comes from having worked on the gasometers. I think it must be quite strange, John, seeing them so differently to how you'd experience them in your working life.
Yeah, very much. It's a kind of a nice coincidence. It's I always liked them, as I said. I've always liked their shapes anyway. But the rest of the industrial sites that I've been involved with is like gasworks have their own architectural style as well for the building. All over the country, they've got their kind of a shape. They're easy once you've seen a few of them, you kind of the other building, you know, the brick buildings on gasworks have got their own kind of architectural design, and yeah, I spent many hours wandering around gasworks, digging holes and taking samples.
But also during their decline, or when they're kind of past things.
Only after they're all closed down. Never when they've been operational.
Is there sort of water stored and sort of standing and used in the gasworks?
They did use quite a lot of water in the cooling because there was a cooling process involved. Because basically they turned coal into coke. Was the way in which they manufactured the gas for the town gas. So they heated up the coal, and as that turned into coke, it gave off the gas, which they then collected and then purified.
Because I was just thinking,
and the impurities that they took off were then used to start the chemical industry, and the pharmaceutical industry. That was generated by all these various chemicals that came out of the coal, which were unwanted in the gas process.
You see, what was interesting me?
Sorry?
I was just saying what was interesting me and why I was asking specifically was whether the water would take on different elements, and then I'm kind of thinking ahead, thinking if I could get hold of that water and use it within the chemical development of films.
Unlikely, I think.
Okay.
Unlikely. It would have been used and disposed of at the time, but it found its way into the rivers basically.
Okay.
It was got rid of because they wouldn't want to store it, so they would have removed it.
But I could potentially buy a bag of coal, heat it up, and use the water. Oh, I may do that.
The chemicals are pretty toxic. I wouldn't do it.
Okay.
I'd just like to thank you for a really enjoyable exhibition. I hope I'll see it in reality, and to say thanks, because to be honest, I'm beginning to struggle to concentrate. So
yeah, no problem.
I'm knock out. But I just want to say thank you. Some of these images look great, and thanks for taking the time to explain it.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you.
Not quite sure how I switch off, but I'll just disappear. Bye.
Okay, bye-bye. Bye.
It's a really interesting experience.
Cheers, bye.
Bye.
I'll sign off as well. Thank you very much. I've really enjoyed it. It's been a nice experience.
Cheers.
Okay. Yeah. Bye-bye. Nice to meet you all.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Anybody want to look at anything else?
I think for me this is a good ending point as well, actually.
Okay.
Yeah, but thanks, Lou. Thanks for letting us see in a strange way your work. It's very interesting.
Cheers, Claire.
Bye, everybody. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye.
I think it would be really interesting to, after having gone round digitally, to actually then go there analog.
Yeah.
How that would be different. Apart from, of course, I would see more from the images, but as a whole exhibition, I also like the idea of what's that like now if I go in there in person.
I think it's always different when you enter a space, isn't it, physically? And that's kind of what the thing about the landscape is as well. Physically, you're in it, but you're only seeing a segment of it. So you're really restricted in what you understand of that landscape and what that landscape becomes. And then your memory of it and your preconception and your logged remembrance.
Yeah, it goes with what you said about memory. There was one thought I had earlier when you did your introduction, talking about when you experiment with old cameras, films, paper, and processes. And I like that in there is the aspect of time, how time progresses, and it kind of contradicts we all know now that stuff be great, but at the same time, there's this idea still of photography being a document of memory. So the idea of fixing it, but then you actually, the way you work, that the actual material to fix it doesn't really work. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. You're fixing something that's meant to be a true document, but that document's only a fraction of a second anyway. So photography is meant to be about truth, but it's always about lie and manipulation. And then you create something that's 3D onto 2D.
For me, that is more of time. Time passes and things change. And even the document isn't what we think the document is.
But the document of the photographic object as well changes in that if you hold that object, you get to see the silvering happens on old images as well by touch. So touch photograph, that sort of aspect of time. And traditionally what people class as images sepia, so fading, if an image hasn't properly been fixed, how the colour tone changes and what you can do to that. It's really interesting. Because there's always a worry with using older papers and older chemicals and all of this stuff that's quite experimental and happenstance, is that eventually that image will go because I've forgotten to do some part of the process, or the emulsions that faded, that it won't last. There was Rachel Hand did something in Sheffield where she'd done the images and put them in the book as a artist book, but if you open the book, then the images would start to disintegrate or to fade because you'd be subjecting them to light. Even so, it's kind of like the latent image was there.
I like that. The more you read it, the more you destroy it.
Yeah. And artists have done it before. There was one thing in Hull, in the old ice house, which is no longer there, where an image came out as the grass grew. So the image was actually embedded into the grass, into the chemical there, and then as that grew, and then it disappeared.
Okay, yeah.
In a way, that just visualizes the process, because any image deteriorates. Even if you fix it properly or whatever, it breaks down.
And same with digital as well. So digital prints and digital dyes, and say again, sorry.
Hard drives.
Yeah, true. Floppy disks.
They don't even last as long as analog images.
But I remember learning photography, and I got told that it would be, if I fixed it and developed it right and washed it, it'd probably last about 150, 200 years, the negative, and then it'd go. My negs are still all right from mid-80s. Yeah, they're not bad.
Looking at my dad's archive, he photographed a lot, and that's color slides, and they've all deteriorated, even though they came from special labs.
Wow.
And that's like, some of them made 1970s, so they're about 60 years now. Color deteriorates quite fast.
Yeah.
I've looked at my own negatives for a while. I think it's only if you proper archive them in non-chemical boxes that they actually last. But like mine have been in folders and the standard sleeves, so they
yeah. Mine too. But there's also that thing as like I work a lot with found footage and glass plates as well. Finding them, they're amazing for staying. Do you know? I don't know if it was the quality of sort of the substrate or the quality of the negative at that point.
I reckon the really old glass negatives, they're probably more, like they last probably longer than anything that came after.
But then you used to get nitrate film as well, didn't you? I've found some of that before, and that was very combustible. So literally, it didn't even need any oxygen. They used to store it because movie films used to be done on it. It just explode and set fire. Destruction of the image.
Yes. Yeah. I just found, I mean, I've been a photographer in the past and now more broader, but I think that threshold at the point when I realized or learned that actually what I just said, that what you try to hold on to and keep and fix in an image, and even that's not going to last. I think at the beginning I found that quite hard.
You think, yeah. And I think Polaroid as well is something that's just fades even quicker as well.
But hey, I wish you a nice rest Easter Monday.